And you can actually feel the suffering. I mean, yeah, my heart is actually crying for him. I really, yeah, heartbreaking.
And to add to what Jovanka said, there was a featured chat read out which said, "My heart is singing for one of these players who I won't name, but my soul is crying for the other one," right? So this is real final round drama at Norway Chess 2023. Hikaru Nakamura has to win with the white pieces to leapfrog Fabi and go first in the standings. 3 points for the win would do it. So what does he open up with? Well, he goes an Italian game. Really? You're going to break Fabi down in this? But now here's the twist. He goes knight g5, which is the fried liver attack. And they actually talked today on the show, by the way, as to why it's called the fried liver attack. So on screen here, you can see a snippet of that. And basically it comes from Italian and it's all about catching the king in a net. You know, you can read for yourself there if you want to pause. Anyway, after d5, the standard move, pawn recaptures. Well, now we see knight a5. If you take here with the knight, that's the mistake. That's how you get your king caught in this net and fried like a liver, right? So knight a5, the tried and tested move. You hit this bishop, we get a check, and now the pawn blocks. So black gives a pawn in this line, but in compensation, you get quick development. You know, this bishop is moving a lot of times. Now, there's three branches of theory here. Hikaru goes bishop d3, bishop e2, also a main move. There's also queen f3, pinning this pawn on c6 to the rook on a8. But okay, bishop d3 played, and now knight d5 is the best move. Although you're moving a minor piece for the second time in the opening, you're usually said not to do that. Here it's justified because you immediately kick this one back, and this knight's looking to come to f4, pressure this clumsy looking bishop. I mean, how many times have we seen a bishop looking weird on d3 in this tournament, right? Anyway, the knight drops back to f3. If you go to e4, you're running into a quick f5, not good. So it drops back here, pressures e5, the bishop covers, we get castles, and now this knight f4 move. And there's no good square for this bishop. You know, if you come to e4, once again you're running into f5. So we see knight c3 developing, and here Fabi smashes up the pawns, and you can instantly see the compensation for black for the pawn that's been given. You've got the bishop pair, you've got the better pawn structure, and lots of pressure down here. So castles was now played, b3 from Hikaru, very logical idea to develop that dark squared bishop. We get rook e8, activating that rook, adding protection here. Rook e1 adds some pressure, and now c5 is a very standard idea because you want to remaneuver this knight to c6 and into d4 or b4, something like that in many lines. You could even be bringing the bishop to this diagonal too, so a multi-purpose move. And now here Hikaru, he tricks Fabi into getting the prep wrong. So Hikaru starts with bishop to a3. But if he'd started with knight to e4, pressuring this bishop and this pawn, then this bishop drops back to f8, very similar to the game. Now if you go bishop f3, pressuring this pawn, well, here there's this move of pawn to f5. And you can't take here on c5. The best move is dropping back here because there's this really nice tactical shot of pawn to e4. And this knight doesn't actually have any squares to hop to without the queen taking it, or the rook if it goes to e5. And therefore, there's two ways to react. One is to take this pawn like this and then grab here, but this is actually a blunder in this particular variation because you can take the rook, knight recaptures, and the bishop takes here. Now remember this position, it's relevant because there's no rook on c1 here and there's no knight on c6. So black's just winning here, you've won a piece, there's not enough pawns to compensate. And if we run it back here, that's why you can't chop this pawn a number of times and liquidate. You lose the bishop at the end of the line. Well, what happens if queen e2, which is the other possible computer move? Because now if takes, there's a pin down here. Well, this time, black can take this knight. Why would you do that? Well, now with the knight eliminated, you can bring the bishop to a6. There's lots of problems down here. Again, black is doing really well here. You know, the bishop's about to come and sit on d3, a monster, and look at this pawn formation. So those are the ideas going on if you start with knight to e4. Then f5 is a decent move for black. But Hikaru goes bishop a3. Now we get the knight coming back to c6 and everything's different. Because now knight e4, the bishop drops back, rook c1, and here we see pawn to f5, but a huge mistake from Fabiano Caruana in this clutch game. So what should he have done instead of f5? Well, knight b4 was the best move because you pressure on this d3 pawn, threatening a fork, so there's no time to pick up c5, and after bishop captures, which is best, pawn recaptures, well, you're still a pawn down, but, you know, tons of pressure here and everything like that. But after pawn to f5, simply knight takes here. And as mentioned before, e4 is just no longer working. You can simply liquidate, this is the line, but now when bishop takes on a3, the rook's not on a1, the knight's not on a5, so you can take here. White is simply winning. What's the material count here? Yeah, the pieces are level, but you're what, 3 pawns ahead? Completely game over. So this is the problem now. No e4. What to do? And one other key line, if you try queen to a5, hitting 2 pieces, well then there's this really nice tactical follow-up of knight to g5. And it feels a fitting move when that was the main motif, you know, out of the opening, the fried liver, the knight hops back to g5, and if you take here, well, this is the killer move. You threaten mate, pawn h6 defends, and you pick up the, check, and then you pick up the rook. And even though bishop b7 can hit the queen and then you win the knight, well, knight e6 is a killer. You're threatening mate, but more than that, you're threatening knight takes on g5 and then delivering one of these checkmates. And actually the top computer move is to give the queen. Clearly hopeless. So coming back here, queen a5, no good. Knight g5, queen h5, the follow-up. So queen d5 tried by Fabi, just trying to glue everything together. The e5 pawn, the c6 knight, put some pressure here. But queen c2 now from Hikaru, simple stuff, preparing to trade queens. And you can't avoid that one. If you ever try and drop the queen back away from this diagonal, it's just too dangerous to leave that queen activated on c4, knight g5 stuff on the cards. So Fabi goes rook d8, we see queen c4, and he captures here. Now Hikaru takes back with the rook. You might be tempted to undouble the pawns, but it's not the best way here because you kill this rook and you get this e-pawn rolling. So rook recaptures. Now rook d5. The rook takes the place of the black queen, trying to hold stuff together, pressuring this knight. And now Hikaru went to the confessional and he said he'd been looking at this knight e6 stuff, you know, coming into c7, but then the bishop's hanging, getting very tactical, and he thought, no, don't go in for that, and his judgment was correct. This is the top move. He now swings this rook to the c file, abandons the pressure on this pawn, but adds new pressure down this file. So bishop d6 played by Fabi. Although this knight is still hanging, you can't yet win it by moving this knight away. There's problems with this bishop. So it drops back to b2, pressures e5, and now this knight moves out of the way of the attack. And this is a sneaky move by Hikaru, rook 4 to c2. I mean, maybe sneaky is not the right word, but kind of a deep idea. And we're going to see the point in a moment. So rook b8 from Fabi, logical improvement of that rook, and now we get d4, breaking out with one of those pawns. Now Fabi captures on d4. If he pushes on with e4, well, this is the key variation. The knight can now hit e5, and if the bishop captures, bishop recaptures, well, now the pawn is not hanging on d2. If this rook was on c4 and Hikaru had pushed d4 a move earlier, well, this pawn would be hanging. So this is the whole point of that weird looking rook retreat. So Fabi decides to take on d4. We get the knight recapturing. The pawn now comes to a5. I mean, it's difficult for Fabi to find good moves. The big problem is this bishop, completely dominated by the white knight on c5. And if you ever eliminate it, well, you're giving white the bishop pair. Lovely position. So knight f3 back just opens up this bishop's eyes once again. also covers the e5 square. And after h6 now from Fabi, well, Hikaru could sit tight, play pawn h3, top computer move, but he instead goes for knight a4. Now, why would you let this bishop out of the box? As it now comes, Fabi springs out. Well, here's Hikaru's point, knight to c3. And this rook is actually running really short of squares. You know, if you come to d3, then you're running into knight e1. Now, you don't technically have to move that rook because the bishop can recapture and you're on this one, but still, you're liquidating pieces, everything like that. So we see the rook instead coming to c5, and now Hikaru reveals his point of allowing this one out and hopping his knight around. Well, he gets in bishop a3, the rook goes, and he takes that bishop pair off the board, which Fabi was banking on for big counterplay. Now we see knight a4. That one's springing back. It comes back to c3 in a minute. You know, Judith Polgar said it's doing some kind of exercises, right? Back and forth. Knight d5 played, centralizing, looking at the b4 jump, but rook c6 puts pressure on these two pieces. What are you going to do about it? Well, the computer's favorite move is this, but okay, here Fabi goes for this one. Difficult to find good moves. And now knight b4 covers the bishop, but also hits the rook, so there's no time for a3. So rook d6 played, and now a3 is a threat, so you do have to take care of this bishop. It drops back to b7. We get knight c3, there the knight goes, doing its exercises, right? And now rook e8, and here Hikaru plays this beautiful centralizing move of knight to d4, and Fabi just calmly delivers this mate, wins Norway. No, I'm joking. That didn't happen. Hikaru went pawn h4. He did not centralise his knight, get branked by Fabi. He did give the king some luft, and now Fabi is still in a bind, right? What to do? I mean, the top computer move is take here, shatter the pawns, but why would you do that when you're trying to keep pieces on the board, look for tactics, look for tricks? So instead, f4 played. We get rook d4, hitting that weak pawn. Rook f8 defends, and knight e5, centralising, threatening knight g6, double attack on rook and pawn. So the rook comes back, hits the knight now hits c4, and these knights are just hopping with a vengeance, right? It's looking at the a5 pawn, it's looking at d6, but Fabi finds this good move of pawn f3, a counterplay move. You know, don't go knight d6 now, or you get checked, and here's the nice thing, you still take here. You don't have to move this bishop yet, you're threatening to make a queen, suddenly black is better. So of course, Hikaru doesn't do that, he takes the pawn. The other option there was g4, but I like this one better from a practical point of view. You know, get that piece off the board, don't let it near your king. King h2 now played. Excuse me, the hay fever stuff, allergies in the UK is terrible at the moment, I can hardly breathe. Knight c2 now on the board, hits this rook, and again, Hikaru just preempting Fabi's plans. You know, maybe he wants knight e1, remove the bishop, then go knight f3 check, some weird stuff starts happening. So rook d3 is played, not only hitting the bishop, but in the event of knight e1, it prepares rook e3, and again, you're just exchanging stuff. So the bishop drops back, we see king g3, king h7 from Fabi. The knight now comes to e3, looking to exchange. Fabi doesn't oblige, he wants to keep tension. The rook is attacked, it moves down to d6, and now knight c6, looking to remaneuver, and we see knight c to d5, threatening to hop into c7. I mean, this position is just miserable for Fabi. Not only material down, but also doesn't even have the initiative. So rook f8 played, knight c7 lands anyway, the bishop comes to b7, and now knight e6. I mean, the journeys that these knights are going on, right? Such nice loops, nice circuits. Rook f7 played, pawn f4, bishop a8, now this one starts moving, binds in the king, and this is just grim. Rook a7, pawn a3, sadistic from Hikaru, king g8, pawn f5, rook e7, king f4, rook a7 shuffling, and d4. Here Fabi resigned. He had had enough at this point. The pawns are just rolling. I mean, this is one sample line. Say you just shuffle the king, top computer move. or you can keep running this pawn. The knight runs away. The rook now hits the back rank, again freeing the way for this pawn. And this rook hasn't even got shuffles anymore. You know, it can't come here or here. If it comes to b7, it blocks the bishop. Say you go knight g8, looking at knight f6. Well, now you check. King goes, check. Keep running the pawn. Okay, bishop here, knight here, heading for this one. You know, the whole thing is just awful, completely over. It's currently plus 42.4. First line, second line mate in 9, third line mate in 8. Okay, horrendous. So, heartbreak for Fabi. Here's the clip from Jovanka.
And you can actually feel the suffering. I mean, yeah, my heart is actually crying for him.
But we really have to commend the opening choice of Hikaru. And a quick story around that, he said he chose this opening based on this game here. So I'm switching across, it's not going to be perfect on your screen, but it's Hikaru Nakamura versus Joshua Friedel. It's from the 2009 US Championship final round, and in this game, Hikaru plays the same opening, and he gets a great position. His opponent actually goes wrong here with bishop e7, doesn't start with knight d5, which like Fabi did, inaccurate move, and Hikaru just blows him off the board. He ends up having to give an exchange on d3 there. These are the final moves where actually the queen gets checkmated with this bishop c1 retreat. So this is 22 moves. Hikaru won the 2009 US Championship with this game, and that's why he thought, you know what, I've not played this for 14 years. I've got good memories of it. I'm going to hit Fabi with this one. And sadly for Fabi, he just mixed his lines. Did f5 at the wrong moment. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. These are the final standings on screen, as you can see here. So some notable mentions: Gukesh finishing third, really incredible. Abdusatorov took down Magnus today in the Armageddon, props to him. And Tari, he actually beat Ali Reza in the classical game, so he salvages a bit of something at the end of the tournament. I hope you enjoyed these recaps. Do subscribe if you never want to miss any future Epic Chess videos, and check out the one on screen if you want to see some more. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you soon.